Saints of the Americas is a series that seeks to share information on the life and times of the saints of the Catholic Church celebrated in the Americas. Your program hosts are Father Jim Corda and Father Jack LaBelle.
Hello and welcome to our show. We're going to begin by talking about Father Felix Varela. He flees Havana, Cuba, where he is born, to the United States. Let's talk about his early life and why that happened.
Well, it's a while before he does flee. And prior to that, being born in 1788, both his parents sadly die by the time he is 6 years old. He's raised by his grandparents. But from a very young age, he has a desire to be a priest. And so we're told that he enters the seminary at the age of 14, and actually by the age of 23 is ordained a priest. We know that he is a very bright student, a very prolific writer. We know that he earned degrees not only in philosophy and theology, but also in chemistry and civil law. And that he was known for his many writings. There were several treatises of philosophy, other books and articles that he wrote. And we know that by the time he's 33, in 1821, he is recognized as one of the foremost thinkers and writers in all of Cuba. And so certainly someone who was able to impart a great deal of wisdom and knowledge to people. Now, as you mentioned, we also have to look at what was going on in Cuba at that time. And one of the things that happens is there is a constitutional monarchy that then is replaced again by an absolute monarchy. And in 1823, the absolute monarchy returned to power, and they executed more than 1,000 reformers of the church. And so there was this desire to hold the church captive, to be able to control it. One of the things then that Father Felix does is he, as you said, he flees Cuba, and at this point in his life, he arrives in the United States.
We know that he quickly, as you had mentioned, flees for his life, and then takes a ship to New York City. And while there, he talks with Bishop John Du Bois, who really hesitated accepting him because of being a little fearful of where he came from, and so an investigation ensues. After this investigation, he's finally welcomed to the diocese in New York, and then he goes to two particular parishes, and then the cathedral, and then to Christ Church. And it was in 1832 that he's appointed pastor of the Church of the Transfiguration of our Lord, where he serves a long time. He serves over 20 years. And so during that time, many things happen in his life, but also in the life of the church, and also in the Hispanic population under his leadership.
Well, we know that in that large church that he ministered to for over 20 years, he encountered many immigrants. And so he, even though being from Cuba, he ministered to the Irish, to the Poles, to Germans, Austrians, Swiss, French, Spanish, and Cubans. And so certainly as more Cubans would immigrate to the United States and certainly be attracted by large cities such as New York, they found their way to Father Felix and to his ministry. As he had done in Cuba, he wrote many articles. We know that he wrote several English and Spanish periodicals. He revised the course of philosophy and wrote a catechism for his diocese. He also began a diocesan newspaper and in fact founded the first Spanish newspaper in the United States. So we see that although at a glance it's a lot of parish ministry, we see that he was able to build on that intellect and that writing and all that knowledge that had been part of his early life as a priest in Cuba.
It's interesting because when we think of Father Felix Varela, we think of him as being a savant, as a very bright person who does a lot of writing and reading, but he also is interested in day-to-day hands-on ministry. We know that During this time at the parish, he establishes an orphanage, which is staffed by the Sisters of Charity. He also advocates for public assistance for Catholic school children. He becomes a hero in the city during the cholera epidemic in 1832. Because of his care for these people, he is certainly well known for that as well. He also won approval of having Catholic chaplains in city hospitals and charitable institutions. He also formed alliances with the city's scientists, people who understood his desire to reach out to those, and also helped to organize the New York Catholic Temperance Association for those addicted to alcohol. Then something happened during that time with the severe anti-Catholicism. And what was his position during that time?
Well, certainly a tendency towards an anti-Catholic movement starts to grow. We know that during this era, he becomes a courageous defender of the Catholic Church. And it is through his published articles and writings that he really speaks out, not only in support of the Catholic Church, but we see more in the principles and the ideals of the Catholic faith. So he starts to write more about human rights. He starts to talk more about cooperation between English and Spanish-speaking communities. He looks at the importance of education for all. Certainly that aspect of education is one that can be used to keep an entire group of people down. If they don't have education, how do they move forward in society? So we see that while he is an ardent supporter, obviously, of the Catholic Church, he really is looking more at what the Catholic Church stands for and starts to promote all of those issues. We know that also he does start to get into a certain sense of political debate, especially about his native Cuba's political independence from Spain. So there were a lot of hot button issues that Father Varela takes on.
In our closing time together in this segment, we also want to mention that Father Varela was a consultant for the Baltimore Catechism, catechism that many Catholics for decades used and learned about the faith. And he was a doctor of theology, and so his expertise in all of that certainly helped to formulate this wonderful catechism that the Church used for countless years. We know that he dies at the age of 65 in 1853, and his body is eventually taken back from Florida to Havana, Cuba, where it is buried in the Great Hall of the University of Havana. In 1997, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp in honor of Father Varela's name, an image for his extraordinary contributions. And so we celebrate his life, and if he is canonized, he will be the first saint from Cuba to do so. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Available through St. Paul's Books and Gifts is a small treatise on peace of heart, both in book and audiobook form, by author Father Jacques Philippe, well-known preacher and retreatant from France. For more information on this item and many more, please visit the bookstore at 926 Boardman Canfield Road in Boardman, or call 330-953-2443, or visit their website at www.stpaulsusa.com. This book, Searching for and Maintaining Peace, is there to help you pursue peace of heart as a pure gift of God. Again, that phone number is 330-953-2443, or visit their website at www.stpaulsusa.com.
My name is Sister Mary Claudina, and I run a home for abandoned children. I want to take care of children who have no parents, because luckily I come from a very loving family. There are 8 of us. We learn to care for each other, to love each other, to fight among each other, just to be a family. And I think that's what I learned from home, and I wanted to share that with children who do not have that opportunity.
Welcome back to our show. Now we're going to talk about an interesting person, Father Eusebio Kino. You would think that things couldn't get any different in the lives of some of these saints to be that we're talking about, but he has a very interesting background. But before we talk about some of his exploits and his missionary work, let's talk about his beginning.
Well, with his name Kino, there are many that automatically take a sort of Spanish equivalency to it. That is the Spanish equivalency to his original name, which was Kun. We know that he is born in the Italian Tyrol, and so he is of Austrian birth, not Spanish, as we first see. We know that after becoming a member of the Jesuits' German province, he distinguishes himself in the study of mathematics, cartography, and astronomy. He taught mathematics at the University of Ingolstadt. However, he wanted to be a missionary in Asia, like the person that he modeled himself after, St. Francis Xavier. He got his wish to be a missionary, but rather he was sent to North America instead of Asia. And so one of those things of needing to be open to the movement of the Spirit. Was he more inclined to be a missionary or more set on a specific place? We see that he does embrace this missionary work to the New World, and he arrives in Mexico in 1681, and he taught in Mexico City for a while. One of the things he did while teaching was he showed a great expertise as an astronomer, and he publishes a book about his observations of a comet.
It's interesting as we will talk more about Father Eusebio that he's very instrumental in mapping and cartography and really settling some of the doubts and the questions that settlers really had about the territory of the United States. We do know that in 1683 that he went to Baja California, where he served in the mission there for 2 years. And at that time, scholars thought that Baja California was an island, but through his extensive research, Father Eusebio was the first to establish that it was actually a peninsula. When the mission in Baja was closed in 1685, then he returned to Mexico City, and then it was in 1687 until his death 24 years later that he worked in the vast territories of Mexico and Arizona, New Mexico, and California. And during that time, he found numerous towns and cities, probably because he was a cartographer, someone who made maps and someone who helped design what is the geography of this vast territory we know as the West. What happens then in his life as a scholar?
Well, we know that he takes part in over 50 expeditions, going to different places to explore the country side, as you said. We know that he's from the Colorado River to the Gulf of California. No one had ever calculated the thousands of miles that he really traveled on horseback, but we know that he was all over these different regions. He traveled 30 to 40 miles a day. He would stop and preach and baptize along the way. He's credited with baptizing 4,500 Native American Indians at one point. He opened trails that today are roads. He kept careful journals about his travels and his observations, and his papers are preserved in the Huntington Library at San Marino, California. So we see that just in that whole idea of passages we use today were mapped out by him. Understandings of the regions that he ministered to are still in practice today. So more than just what might be seen as a priest. Certainly that missionary work, that baptizing, that bringing thousands to the faith is important. But we see, like many of the saints in that part of the United States during that time, or many of the priests and religious, they really involve themselves in the whole building up of the society and the territories of the time.
It's interesting talking about maps. Father Kino's maps were really the most accurate at the time. And one of the maps he produced in 1705 covered an area of 200 miles east to west and 250 miles north to south. So his maps and several books that Father Eusebio wrote really brought him fame in Europe as well. He also began 19 cattle ranches in southern Arizona and in northern Mexico. He introduced European grains and fruits. Wheat culture in California had begun. And also a mission was begun in 1698 where there was a farm of fields for wheat, herds of cattle, sheep, and goats. He also built an original church in Tucson. Tell us about that church.
Well, this is the church of San Xavier del Bac outside of Tucson. We know that it's a popular tourist stop to this very day. However, he did not build an elaborate church that stands there now, but rather the first one that he built was one that was simply a missionary church to serve the Native Americans. The Franciscans later rebuilt the church that we see today. We do know that he dies at the age of 66 while on one of his travels. Mm-hmm. He rode out from a mission in Dolores in northern Mexico, and he dedicated a chapel there, but he became ill, and as a result, he dies in 1711. There's an interesting fact about an image of this person on the road to sainthood, if you'd like to share that with us.
Yes, it's interesting because as he becomes ill during his Mass, and he died there on March 15th, 1711, with a calfskin as a mattress and his pack saddle for a pillow, he was certainly one of the great missionaries that the country really has ever known. He was preceded by some 82 years by Franciscan Father Junipero Serra, founder of the California Missions, who was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 1988. We know that Father Eusebio is buried in Mexico in a shrine dedicated to him. Throughout his 66 years as a missionary, he established some 24 missions. And we also know, finally, tell us about his shrine in the U.S. Capitol.
Well, one of the standing traditions is that each of the 50 states has two different statues in Statuary Hall in the Capitol. And the state of Arizona, among their two, is a statue of of Father Eusebio Kino, who we hope one day will become a saint. And so that's very interesting that of all the people who have been part of the life of the state of Arizona, they still lift him up as this great kind of founding father of their territory and all that they know today.
And whenever we look at some maps about the Western Territory, perhaps those maps were originated by Father Kino. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. The Society of St. Paul announces a new book on Padre Pio by Italian journalist Stefano Campanella. The director of Padre Pio Television gives readers an intimate insight into this saint who Pope Francis appointed as one of the great patrons of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. This edition can be found at St. Paul's Books and Gifts at 926 Boardman Poland Road, located across from the Olive Garden restaurant. This book on Padre Pio talks about his time in the sacrament of confession with countless of Catholic pilgrims and as a contemplative saint whose life was blessed in countless ways. Visit St. Paul's Books and Gifts Monday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. or call 330-953-2443 or email at stpaulsbookstore@gmail.com to learn more about Padre Pio and many other great saints of the Catholic Church.
33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Whether it's passing on medicine, a blanket, or something as simple as a glass of water, that's how compassion works. And that's how Maryknoll works, hand to hand to hand. For nearly 100 years, Maryknoll's been passing on your help to the priests and brothers working in 26 countries around the world. Maryknoll, an American Catholic organization, dedicates 86 cents of every dollar donated to their programs, serving the world's poor and powerless. And that's how it works. Compassion flows from your hand to the hand of someone in need. Hand to hand to hand. That's Maryknoll.
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 Welcome back to our show. Now we're going to talk about Father Magin Catala. It's interesting in some of our shows when we talk about those missionaries to the state of California and also the country of Mexico, Saint Junipero Serra's name comes up, and later on in our series we're going to talk about him. But Father Catala's life could be very similar to Father Junipero Serra. In what way?
Well, a lot of their preparation for the ministry that they lived out in the United States, certainly in California and in that region, are very similar. Though Father Catala comes later, he kind of follows after what Junipero Serra does. Both were originally from Spain. Both entered the Franciscan seminary when they were 16. Both of them continued to volunteer and labor in the New World in missions. And both were sent to the College of San Fernando in Mexico City. Father Serra in 1750, Father Catala in 1786. We know that Father Serra went on to California where he founded 9 missions before his death, and eventually there would be 21 missions. But after studying the Indian languages and the missions methodologies in Mexico City, Father Catala was then sent to Monterrey in 1793. And his first assignment was a chaplain on a Spanish ship that sailed regularly between Mexico and Vancouver. As he would be on this ship, he would encounter and meet people, certainly that were familiar with what was going on in this area. After a year of doing this, the governor asked him to continue, but he declined because he wanted to devote himself to the Native Americans in California. So he's going from Mexico to Vancouver. He develops a love for the people that are kind of in the middle. And so that ship is always going to have him just from one port to another. He wants to minister to these people. And so he declines the offer and sets his course on a new ministry.
It's interesting, after a short time at the mission San Francisco in 1794, Father Magin moves to south to Santa Clara, which is about 40 miles, which is really the 8th mission that Father Junipero Serra had created. And he remained in this particular mission at Santa Clara until his death, and he died at the age of 69. Although he was assigned to this Santa Clara mission, we see that Father didn't stay there all the time. His ministry, like Father Serra, took him to the wilderness. And so let's talk about how his missionary journey took him to other places besides the Santa Clara mission.
Well, we know that although he was assigned there, he really felt the need to move beyond. He knew that there were thousands more Indians in villages that just continued to spring up, and he wanted to meet their needs. And so he finds himself journeying ever closer to them. He traveled extensively, we're told, as far as San Jacinto Valley. We know that that was 100 miles away from where he was assigned. But he wanted to put himself in the presence of all of those who he felt would really benefit from understanding who Jesus Christ was. He becomes a missionary to them. We know that there's a prayer card of him that says, "Often he made perilous journeys to distant tribes and invariably returned accompanied by large numbers of pagan Indians who his sweet charity had induced to abandon their wild life and happily join the Christian community of Santa Clara." So he does continue to return to Santa Clara, but always bringing back converts to the faith.
It's interesting because in the beginning we talked about his life kind of mirroring that of Saint Junipero Serra, and we see that that does so not only in their physicality because of the traveling and the stress and weight put on their physical body. We see that he continues to move on in this ministry in spite of being severely crippled, especially having infections in his feet. But he he just continued to reach out to these people, and this mission that he really wanted to continue, he did so until the age of 69. But we do know that another priest enters in the scene and kind of assists Father Catala in his ministry. Let's talk about him.
Well, we know that another priest arrives several years after he's been assigned to Santa Clara, and this priest was assigned the responsibility of overseeing the material well-being, so that really, as Father Catala perceives it, so that he can concentrate on ministering to the spiritual well-being of the Indians. So he continues to instruct the Catholic faith. He teaches them about the Stations of the Cross and the Rosary, preaches from the pulpit, even until his rheumatism gets so bad that he's unable to climb up into the pulpit. But it was really this other priest that allowed, they enter into this collaborative ministry so that all of the needs of the mission are taken care of, but that Father can go out and do what he really feels is essential to his life's ministry.
According to a biographer, Father Magin baptized 5,471 infants, children or adults. He presided at 1,095 weddings and more than 5,000 funerals. So in his 69 years of life and his many years of priesthood, we see that he certainly served as a premier sacramental minister, sharing the faith, uniting those folks in marriage, and also commending those to eternal life. He's really known for his holiness and his asceticism. History tells us that he ate very little. He ate no meat, eggs, or wine. So his evening meal basically consisted of corn and milk. He practiced disciplines that are popular nowadays. He prayed for long hours in a chapel in front of a large crucifix, which he felt sometimes was levitating. And so there's this transcendence, this him being united to the Lord in prayer, and also almost this type of ecstasy in prayer. Let's talk about those briefly in close, about his holiness and sanctity and what people saw about him.
Well, we know that the people who encountered him saw, of course, as you mentioned, great holiness. As they testify to his sanctity, they feel that his intercession is attributed to many miracles, prophecies, and revelations pertaining to him. We know that he does die at the age of 69 in 1830, but as we lift him up on this journey towards sainthood, we continue to recognize in him what many people of his time saw, a man of great holiness, of great sanctity, and a great desire to serve God's people.
And as we think of Father Catala, we also think of St. Junipero Serra and their wonderful work in the missions of California. Thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Saints of the Americas was a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program hosts were Father Jim Corda and Father Jack Lavelle.